Scotland is as sacred to me as an Alpha Chi Omega Pledge's oil slick mug full of pumpkin spice latte. I don't mean that it gives me enough of a buzz to fight off the hangover for my 8 a.m. psych class. More like I've inherited the genetic memory of doing vague but epic shit with rocks and trees. My ancestors died fighting for James III and championed Mary Queen of Scots. But enough about the lineage that I've fallen far short of. This week's episode of Strength Stories begins on a little lump of rock off the coast of the Outer Hebrides. You know that thing called insular dwarfism, where animals living on a small island tend to shrink over the course of generations? That's what happened to Homo florenziens in Indonesia. Well, Angus MacAskill dramatically defied the trend. Born in 1825 to Christina Campbell and Norman MacAskill, there was nothing unusual about baby Angus's size. Old Norm stood at 5'9", which was only slightly above average height for the time, so he may have developed some dark suspicions when Angus started growing like Publix stock as a teen. By that time, the MacAskills and their 13 children had crossed the nauseous Atlantic to settle on Cape Breton Island. At 14, Angus hopped a fishing schooner to North Sydney to loom around the dance floor with some eligible ladies. To that end, the Dictionary of Canadian Biography Online notes Angus's, quote, deep-set blue eyes and musical, if somewhat hollow voice, unquote. A compelling combination of gentle, imposing, and creepy. His comportment rustled enough jimmies that some clout-horny fuckboy shouted "World Star" and took a swing. Angus floored said fuckboy with one defensive punch. The guy stayed down for so long that folks thought he'd settled up with the Sweet Reaper. Angus fled to the ship he'd sailed down on, where the captain found him praying for the fuckboy's life. Strange to think that Angus went to his knees when he could have just stood up straight, stuck his head through the heavens, and made eye contact with Jesus. The whole stunt was reminiscent of Tyson weeping for his opponent on the way to the ring. The trauma of that event drove young Angus to clean living and early evenings. The 20-year-old 7'4" MacAskill tottered around Nova Scotia getting hailed as Big Boy, a nickname that can only be trilled in falsetto by Alpha Chi Omega Pledges at the mixer that preceded the aforementioned 8 a.m. psych class. Angus wasn't even finished growing. He topped out at 7'9" and 510 pounds by his mid-20s. The guy had a foot and 100 pounds on Half-Thor, who has a foot and over 200 pounds on me. All of this is making me feel like Homo florenziens, which is one word more than what people called me in high school. But this isn't a channel about my twink years. It's about how Angus was a tailor's nightmare and Vince McMahon's wet dream. Angus's chest was an unprecedented 80 inches, the largest measurement ever recorded for any non-obese person. His shoulders were 44 inches across. His palm was 8 inches wide and a foot long. His wrists were 13.5 inches, and he had 8 by 16-inch feet. I don't have the measurement all of you are waiting for, but I'm sure his lower limb would have made Ron Jeremy pull a George Costanza and fall back on the faithful excuse of shrinkage. But there's a lot more that such a large lad can get up to than shaming porn icons. The more relevant meat of this episode is concerned with his feats of strength. Word has it that he carried a 2,800-pound ship anchor down a wharf like a Husafell stone, and pinch-gripped a hundredweight to shoulder height to perform a 10-minute Hercules hold. In a setup befitting a parable, MacAskill garnered the envy of 2 local fishermen when he bilged his 2-ton boat by simply flipping it over. Nobody needed to walk on water because Angus could have simply chucked them to the other coast. He lifted full-grown horses over 4-foot fences and set a 40-foot mast on a schooner like Brian Shaw handling the Fingal's Fingers. Angus was also known to carry 350-pound barrels under either arm. The thinking man would wonder whether those barrels contained adamantium or gold. The autistically single-minded man would consider that either barrel would be on the very heavy side for an Atlas stone. Have you ever seen Tom Stoltman carry one of those around like a football? Stoltman deservingly performs in front of tens of thousands, but Angus was probably toting those barrels up a boat ramp, with nobody but fishwives and the dead eyes of the fresh catch to see. Talk about a man before his time. Angus MacAskill, people. Positively pissening. In 1859, Angus signed on with P.T. Barnum and appeared next to General Tom Thumb to satisfy that fundamental human need to see two very different versions of the same item. In this case, we're talking about people. Barnum sent Angus to cast his long shadow over Cuba and the West Indies. Queen Victoria invited him to Windsor Castle, proclaiming him, quote, the tallest, stoutest, and strongest man ever to enter the palace. Angus didn't let that go to his head, possibly because it was at an altitude too high for words to reach. He returned home from his world tour to purchase a gristmill and general store. In the summer of 1863, Angus sailed to Halifax to sell produce and purchase stock for the winter. As a valued Publix employee, I deeply appreciate his attention to inventory. Angus fell so ill that he was forced to move back into his childhood home. His siblings lengthened his bed in an undoubtedly comical scene. The diagnosis was as 19th century as it gets. The accursed brain fever. On August 8th of 1863, Angus passed on in peaceful slumber, attended by the local Presbyterian minister and basically every villager who could fit into the living room. His obituary in the Halifax Acadian Recorder ratified that fact, reporting that Angus's, quote, mild and gentle manner endeared him to all who had the pleasure of his acquaintance, unquote. He was buried alongside his parents in a mound that to this day mogs the rest of the cemetery. Go drop daisies on his grave or view his personal effects in the giant MacAskill Museum, which has locations in Englishtown and Dunvegan. If those options don't tickle your fancy, just wait with bated breath until the next episode of Strength Stories. It never hurts to expand your lung capacity. Just be sure to like, comment, and subscribe before you go cross-eyed. Until next time, yada yada Musashi.